My name is Paula Kohler. I'm former spouse was Alton Foss, one of the defendants of the Gainesville Eight, and who's now deceased. So I know you might have specific questions, but so I was a vice president for research and a professor as well. And I've recently retired from that. But so I'm very familiar with oral history, although most of my work was quantitative. And my work over the last 70, 80, 90, 2000, 50 years has been focused on disability. And so a lot of that builds on being married to somebody that had a disability. He had been shot in Vietnam, but then working with disabled vets a lot. And I worked real closely, I don't know if you'd call it worked, but we were very close to Dr. Henry Lyons. And he was the chief of psychiatry at the VA in Gainesville. So he would sometimes connect us with other vets that were struggling for some reason. So it really, my whole career spanned from being involved with disabled vets, or vets with disabilities, I should say. So that's where I'm coming from.
I love that context. I'm just gonna put it in there for the record. My name is Gabrielle Hurd, and the date is August 26th. Just to get further context on who you were before the trial, and so when were you born? Where did you grow up?
Oh, I was born in Palatka, Florida. You may recognize it on the way to Crescent Beach. And my parents were students, or my father was a student at the University of Florida. And my mother was from Palatka, so she went over there to have her babies. And I lived in Flavettes, which don't exist anymore. And we moved down to Central Florida, first to Sanford, and then to the Merritt Island, Cocoa Beach area. So I grew up in that area. We lived in Rockledge from the time I was in second grade until I graduated from high school. And then I went off to the University of Florida myself and was a business major back in the day, 1968. So I was the only woman in most of my business classes during that time, which has its own challenges and made it very exciting.
When did you first start, when did the Vietnam War come into your consciousness? When do you remember that?
Oh my gosh. Well, in high school, my older brother, and I think I talked a little bit about this in my previous interview with y'all. So I have a brother that's older by 3 years. And so once he graduated from high school in 1965, Vietnam was raging. So he went to college, didn't make it, and then volunteered for the draft. So he was in OCS up at Fort Benning, Georgia, and really saw the writing on the wall that everybody that graduated from OCS went straight to Vietnam. So I'm not sure, he's a very lucky guy. He dropped out of OCS, and then he was assigned to Panama, at the Panama Canal for the rest of his time in the Army. And he gained some great business skills there and whatnot, and went on to have his own construction business, etc. But I had cousins that were the same age, and so it was really disturbing about how many of your friends and family were going to end up in Vietnam. So yes, it was in 1968 when I graduated from high school. We saw the death of Martin Luther King. We saw the death of Bobby Kennedy. We saw the craziness with, what's his name, from Alabama, Governor Wallace. And, it was just a crazy year to be a young adult. And then you saw your friends that you graduated from high school going off to Vietnam. So when I got to the university, of course, it was just much more kind of in your face with protest. We protested all the time. We would go to the ROTC building. The Black Panther it was the Black Panther movement was kind of raging at the same time. In fact, I rode a motorcycle to a Black Panther rally and had my picture on the front of the Gainesville Sun back in, 1969 or 1970 or something like that. So then Kent State happened, and, it was just insane. But to me, what brought things into sort of closer focus was, well, we had the Chicago Seven, and
If you could give context on what that means really quick for people who
the
don't know.
Chicago Seven, yeah. So that was a group of 7 defendants that were accused of planning and disrupting the 1968 Democratic Convention in Chicago. Abby Hoffman, Jerry Rubin, and I can't remember the other defendants. But so anyway, they were acquitted as well.
Yeah.
So then, so fast forward to 1973 or 72, Kent State. We went to Washington in protest over the Kent State killings. Some of my closest colleagues that I've worked with as a professor are at Kent State. So I can never work with them without remembering Kent State and what happened there.
So you were really involved in the anti-war protests.
Yes, but like I said, what brought it into sort of closer focus was when I met Stan Mickelson, John Briggs. So they were really good friends of mine before the indictments. And I'm not sure how we ever met. One of my best girlfriends, and she started going out with Stan, and we were just a real close group of friends. And
were you all attending University of Florida at the time?
Pat and I were. I don't know that Stan and John were. It's been 50 years ago, so I don't really remember. But no, I can't remember that. But anyway, so so then it became closer in focus, and just because of the relationship of veterans to that war. So we graduated. I graduated in 1972, and I moved up to Washington, D.C. shortly after that, and had a job up there, and eventually I worked for National Wildlife Federation. I was a business major, but I wanted to save the world. So, you go to work for an organization like that. You're not going to manufacture widgets or do fashion design, It's against my principles.
Well, I'm curious. So, before you got into thinking about the Vietnam War, what did you think the United States' reason was for fighting in Vietnam, and how did that change once you started talking to Vietnam veterans?
Oh, what did we think? Why we were fighting in Vietnam? I don't think anybody knew.
It was just accepted.
It was just, it was distant for a while, but what happened as the war went on, it became much more in your face. And the more connected you got to it because of friends and family going over there to fight, then it became really in your face. So, but why you would hear, the French were fighting this war, somehow we decided we would take it over from them. Who knows? But then later on, there's a really good article in Rolling Stone, and it was a Nixon-CIA Lansky connection. So you should go back up and look in the archives of Rolling Stone and see if you can get that article. So then we learn things like, well, Lady Bird Johnson owns a share in the company that makes the tiger cages in which they house Vietnamese prisoners. So you started really getting more of these inside kind of information. And of course, we have the Pentagon Papers that came out, and you realized how much the country was being lied to about the war. It just, as those things came out, then more and more people started waking up.
Kind of going back to that, I'm interested, what do you think about the Gulf of Tonkin resolution to the war?
Geez, what do I think about that?
It's in there, so I figured I might ask.
Right, yeah, I don't remember the details of that now,
Okay,
honestly. But, another big issue that came up with your friends and colleagues was, do you go to Canada? And, what's going to happen if you go to Canada? Because that was the only route out other than, you could be a conscientious objector, but they weren't buying that. So if you did want to go, you went to Canada. So if I recall, I had a couple of acquaintances that did that. And then again, the question became, are we going to give them amnesty? Can they come back? So just became such a brutally horrible thing. I mean, it was always brutal and horrible in Vietnam. Of course, well, what were we told? The communists are coming. You know, you got to think back to 1954 and the early 50s and the big communist scare, and you know that kind of never went away. And that's what this was. You know, that's what you were told this is all about. We're fighting the communists, and we need to do it in Vietnam so we don't do it here in the U.S. That kind of thing. So, I mean, that's what everybody was told. That's why it's important to fight this war and lose all these men.
Can you tell me more about when you heard about the release of the Pentagon Papers? Like, how did that change things for you?
Well, it was just another way in which kind of the lies were coming out. Subtle relationships, like I described with Lady Bird Johnson. And, you know, McNamara had just been, there were all these talking heads and fighting the communists, blah, blah, blah. We're winning, blah, blah, blah. Then the Pentagon Papers come out and it's like an entirely different story than what you've been fed. Yeah. So anger, greater commitment to stop this thing, I think were the primary reactions to that.
Let's see.
Did you see that movie?
Which movie?
Oh, the Pentagon Papers.
Oh, I need to now.
It was really good. It's all about the Post and the Times, and they're sort of going back and forth, and you know, how are they going to break the story? And it was good. It was very good.
I gotta get into that. I know. I'm curious, when did you become involved in Vietnam veterans against the war?
Well, probably my senior year at Florida. When, like I said, Stan was a good friend of mine, and he was connected with other veterans as well. And then I met Alton, and that was right after the indictments came down. Like I said, I had moved to D.C. Right after I graduated. I didn't really like it up there at all. It was hot as blazes. It was still, oh my gosh, it just wasn't a fun place to be at the time. And well, I'll give you an example. So 1973, I lived out in Centerville, Virginia, right near Manassas. In fact, I had my picture taken at Manassas train station, so it looks just like this Crosby, Stills and Nash album cover. Have you ever seen that?
I need to, though.
You need to go see
another thing I need to see. Another thing.
Right. There's a train station at Manassas, Virginia, and a sign hangs down, and that was on their album cover. So anyway, we did that. So I live out there, and we are. I was a really good pool player. So going to the bar, right there in Centerville, and I want to play pool. And I think my roommate was with me. We don't let women play in here. Every time we have women in here, they get in a fight. And I'm like, so what a swell place to live. I can't even play pool in the local friggin' bar because the guys there, I guess, fight over the women. Who knows? But it was a very redneck place. So anyway, but one thing we did do before I moved was, so Watergate had broken the year before. And so Scott and Stanley and Alton all came up to my apartment, and we went in, we got into D.C. at 4 a.m. for the Watergate hearings when John Mitchell was going to testify that day. So we took marijuana brownies, of course, but it was the first time they had metal detectors for people going into the courthouse. And it was because they heard some of the Vietnam veterans were going to be there. And and it's funny because they were under indictment. So the indictment made it so they couldn't attend the conventions in Miami. But I guess it didn't restrict them from traveling other places. So anyway, they came up and yeah, we went in, we sat in the front row, because there were only like 15 spots for the public. Otherwise it was just, senators. Yeah. And so this was, I think it was Onue from Hawaii or with Tip O'Neill. I can't remember who it was, but John Mitchell was testifying, and he was, had been the Attorney General. His wife, Martha Mitchell, Martha Mitchell, yeah. She had flipped on him, and all this craziness was going on. So we were very thrilled to be there witnessing these pigs being, held and having to testify there before the Senate Watergate Committee. So,
going back, I'm interested to start I want to hear about how you met Scott Camille and how you got. So I understand you were a juror in the trial?
No, I wasn't a juror. No.
Okay. Tell me
I was
about
a spouse.
what, how are you related to the trial? I think they told me the wrong thing before the interview.
Oh, so my ex-husband, her dad, was one of the defendants.
Okay.
Alton Foss.
Okay.
So how did I meet them? I met them through Stan and John.
Okay.
Who were friends, we were all in Gainesville, who were friends of mine before the indictments came down.
Okay.
I mean, they had been friends of mine for a couple of years.
That's great.
So,
excuse me, I apologize.
you're okay.
So how did you feel when the indictment came out and your husband was...
Well, he was my boyfriend.
Or your boyfriend at the time.
Right.
Tell me about that day and what happened and what you remember from that.
Well, I was living in D.C., and had I just been down here for a visit? Oh, it was just like, shock. What the hell's going on here? I mean, that's basically what everybody said. I mean, plans were already being made to go to the conventions and protest, obviously, against the war. So, then what is this? This is more shady BS from the Nixon administration.
Yeah.
I mean, that's how everybody looked at it.
And what did your planning look like? Like, obviously it was nonviolent. It had...
Right.
So when you were planning things, like, how did that...
Well, I wasn't
contrast?
into the core planning, so because I hadn't moved back yet.
Okay.
And then it all just freaking stopped. Well, I don't know if it all stopped, but the core clearly was not going to be able to be there once the indictments came down.
And so...
I think the indictments came down in June.
When the trial started, like, did you guys have any sense that government agents had infiltrated Vietnam veterans against the war?
Well, yes, but not to the extent that they did.
Like, do you remember, were there people you were suspicious of, or was that, like, felt like they were watching you? Like,
well, what it came down to that you literally found out was probably about 50% of the people in the protests movement were informers.
Okay.
And the other,
that's a huge
I don't know,
number. Yeah.
or they were just interested in chicks, So, we like to go out with these women because they don't wear bras and, they're freedom-loving, loose-loving women and blah, blah, blah.
So it's just like today, there's a lot of disingenuine people in the movement. And
Absolutely.
you're like, these people are telling...
Absolutely. And people were paranoid. I mean, you were paranoid because you wouldn't turn around, somebody got busted. Well, they got busted because somebody was an informer. Or somebody got busted and then they flipped that person and they became an informer. So that happened like all around you all the time.
And when people are getting busted, like, what are they usually getting busted for?
Oh,
like,
pot. Selling pot or whatever. Selling a baggie of pot, having a baggie of pot. I mean, nothing was legal back then. So...
Do you think them getting people on all these pot charges was just a way to interrupt their organizing and protesting?
Some of it probably was. But it was just like, I don't know, drugs kill. They'd show those marijuana movies. And it was just... We had normal in Gainesville, but yeah, I don't know how to describe it. So you were always paranoid. If you smoked pot, you were paranoid. It was like a paranoid state that we lived in. And part of that was because of that. Look what happened in 1968. Martin Luther King was killed. Bobby Kennedy was killed. George Wallace, who was a pig and standing up to keep people from going into the University of Alabama. There was so much, and there was so much racial tension there was so much tension, I guess I should say, in 1968, the year I graduated from high school. And so you didn't live in La La Land anymore. So maybe your parents tried to, you're a part of this good, wholesome American family, but my high school had 2 African American students in it. It was very segregated. We had, I think, 2 people with disabilities in our high school. So it was, as you got older, it was like, okay, so you preach fairness and you preach, but yet we're so segregated. And you don't, what's wrong with this picture?
Yeah.
So sort of the more you developed, I'd say through the teenage years, you realize the inequities. I mean, we wouldn't drive through the black part of town because something might happen to you. Paranoia. So whites created paranoia about the blacks, and I'm sure vice versa, rightfully so in that case. I lived in the South.
Yeah.
We used to say there's Gainesville and there's the rest of Alachua County because it's very rural and very, very farm or agriculture driven. So, there was just a lot of that. And as you got older and recognized the inequities and, and the war was part of that, but just the disparities of people and women, oh my God. I don't want to go into that, but let me tell you.
I relate.
Still exists.
Still exists.
Yes.
Talking about you guys were living in the South, and there's a lot of disingenuine people in the movement and Vietnam veterans against the war. Did you notice differences between the people organizing in the North and the South when you were maybe, I know DC isn't exactly it's not like the proper North, but it's further north than when you're down south here in Gainesville.
Right. Well, there were some pretty significant riots in D.C. When was that? 67, maybe? Things weren't right there. There were huge riots in Detroit. I remember my father was from Rhode Island, and our family would go up there for vacations in the summertime. And, we'd drive 6 people in this station wagon with no air conditioning. And then it would be like, okay, well, we have to drive past Washington. We have to drive past New York City. So what is going to happen? So, parents being concerned, how are we going to get our family safely through these areas because these race riots are going on? And, of course, then that created our side against their side.
Yeah.
I mean, that's how they saw it. And my parents had always been very, I forget the word I'm struggling for, is, non-racist, non-blah, blah, blah. Everybody deserves a chance, blah, blah, blah. But, once those things happened, it pitted one side against the other side, I guess, like in the North and South when they fought the Civil War.
Did you see a divide between black protesters and white protesters to do with the Vietnam War? Did they ever work together a lot?
It seemed to me they did. I see more. There were a number of us that were involved in the Black Panther riots.
Yeah.
Was it Black Panther? What is that the group I'm trying to think of?
Black Power?
Yeah, it was there were a number of protests and organized speeches and demonstrations. We had them here in Gainesville. And like I said, it was riding a motorcycle. And so there were a lot of white people involved in that.
Yeah.
In fact, I remember them trying to raid that. I think it was that particular one or another one. And we were down by 13th and University, and this could have been Kent State. So there were huge protests when Kent State happened. And I remember this cop dragging me to put me on the bus to take me to be arrested. And some guy pulling me away from him and the cop taking him. I mean, that close to being put on the bus. But see, I was thinking that was a Black Panther rally, but maybe it was a Kent State one. It's been a long time.
Well,
so
I'm sorry my questions are so out of order, but
it's okay. Then I'm out of order because you're going to see my rambling.
How much did you hear about the plan to protest the Republican National Convention before your boyfriend and the other Vietnam veterans against the war were indicted?
Only that it was happening, and it was a network because of the folks in Texas and up north and Miami and Gainesville. So there was a good network of folks that were involved in it. Everybody converging on Miami for that. Different things. I don't know how much detail to go into. I don't want to go into too much detail. So, what the protests would look like, what kinds of strategies there would be in terms of offensive strategies kind of thing.
Yeah, I heard that, the federal, the FBI was planning to close off the bridges and
not let people.
Yeah. Did you hear about
that? I don't remember about. Yeah.
Okay.
I don't remember that.
So after that happened,
they were afraid.
Yeah, they were afraid of violence from the FBI.
The FBI and the Nixon administration were afraid of VVAW because they had legitimacy. And it's just like if you look back into the record, they were scared to death of John Lennon, and that John Lennon could convince people that the war was wrong, and a number of other things. Deathly afraid of him. And then the same so they were paranoid of, there was so much paranoia back then. They were paranoid truly of VVAW, which is why they sent these indictment. Well, why they sent the informers and submerged them, and why they went ahead and did this grand jury and this indictment, because they had legitimacy.
What?
And that's why I said, as the things grew sharper, then you realized that the legitimacy of the group and the message of that group. So that was authentic.
Yeah.
It wasn't a bunch of hippies running around saying, we don't like war, make love, not war. I mean, that's how the protests were. I would say if you watch TV and you looked back on tapes of demonstrations, that's what you'd see a lot, like out at Berkeley or other places in California. Although one of the hugest protests that happened in Berkeley was around people with disabilities and students with disabilities getting the supports that they needed in order to attend the university. And these were people with really significant disabilities, like they needed an iron lung.
Yeah.
They needed specialized dorms and things like that. So that was a big, there were lots of demonstrations about that. But that was how they would be portrayed. Look at all these hippies, they want peace, they make love, not war. And that's how it was cast. But when you came to VVAW, they couldn't say that, because it was authentic. So to me, that was the difference in why they were so paranoid of that group. John Lennon had a message and he had listeners, and VVAW had legitimacy. So,
what do you think? I guess this kind of relates back to Watergate. Why do you think Nixon and the Republican National Convention were so scared of being exposed for their illegitimacy? Like, what parts of them were illegitimate, and what were they trying to hide?
Well, go back and read that Nixon CIA Lansky connection. It's a great article. It lays all of that out.
Oh, the Rolling Stone?
The Rolling Stone,
Yeah.
yes, article. And it was, dirty deeds by the CIA. Nixon using the CIA as he wanted to. It was his private army, I mean, not that there weren't issues in the world. I mean, we lived in Florida. We had the Cuban Missile Crisis.
Yeah.
So there were real risks associated with life in the world. But oh my gosh, he was such a everything he did, all the tapes, all the destroying the tapes, his underground people, these thugs that worked for him, just like Donald Trump. Excuse me.
Get it bad. It's okay.
All of these same thugs, It's just like we're repeating ourselves.
I know.
It's terrible.
So,
anyway, so I don't know why was
how much of the general public do you feel like was he waiting to, because there was sort of this counterculture movement that had legitimacy, that had growing legitimacy, and how much of the rest of the public do you think
recognize that?
Yeah.
Well, I would say my parents never did. I don't think. I mean, it was really interesting because the people that voted for Nixon didn't. I mean, we called him Tricky Dick. But there were a lot of people who thought he should have won the Kennedy race, the Kennedy-Nixon race, and he didn't. And then he didn't come in until later, after Kennedy and Johnson were done. So, yeah, I mean, I don't think a lot of people saw. They're like, just like Trump. I can do anything. I could probably shoot somebody on the street and get away with it. Well, Nixon was kind of the same way.
Yeah. He was popular
Well,
at the time.
and maybe because they saw him as a strong arm against the race riots or, that kind of thing.
So I want to kind of pivot to the trial. How much do you remember of the trial? Were you there supporting him? Or can you just tell me a little bit about that?
We were there every day. Well, again, you would have strategy meetings amongst the defense and with the attorneys and all the defendants and the informers who somehow could still be a part of the defense team up until 2 weeks into the trial. I think it was 2 weeks. So the trial, it just went on and on and on about all these dirty deeds, all these things that were planned. They were going to do this, they were going to do that, on and on and on. And, just one witness, one informer after another, basically. And until they called Emerson Poe. You all know who he is. So that was such a shock to the team. It just blew everybody's mind.
Yeah.
How is this even possible? There were the judge, Arno, he was just this stupid old man that, oh my God, just hell bent to get this prosecution done.
Do you think he leaned to the side of the prosecution?
It seemed like it.
He just wanted to get over with it. And
it seemed like it, yeah. And the broom closet next to the defense meeting room, you heard about that?
No, I didn't.
There were some from the prosecution that were in the broom closet next to the defense meeting room.
Yeah.
With listening devices.
Oh God.
They got caught. I don't remember who caught them, but it was like, here we go. So they did that, and then they bring on Emerson Poe as a witness. I mean, he was Scott's best friend. And he had been in the defense meetings up until that time, until he was exposed as an informer. I mean, that is, where is this justice?
How long? Yeah.
I mean, it was just, that kind of stuff would just be, they would flabbergast you because it's so atrocious. I mean, it's just atrocious. And so those kind of things keep turning up. And then when finally the defense, they finally rested, and the defense, and I can't remember, it was a day. I think we had it 1 day, maybe a day and a half. It was very short. And it went to the jury. And so we were all out. There's a great video of this. We were all out on the courtyard lawn playing touch football while the jury was in session. So basically, this was amazing. They met, chose their leader, Lois Hensel. They ordered lunch, they ate lunch, and then they came back with their verdict. And so we're like, oh my gosh, we got to go in already. And it was kind of surprising. So they came back in, and then that's as long as it took for them to come to a unanimous decision that they were not guilty.
Why do you think they chose so quickly after there was
a month long of prosecution witnesses?
Yeah.
They just saw right through it, is all I can say. And when they saw things like the Poe incident, I don't think the jury probably ever heard of the broom closet incident, but they clearly knew of the Poe because he was called as a witness. I don't know. It was shoddy, and when our team of attorneys would cross-examine the witnesses, they could just punch so many holes in the stories. And I don't know, it seems like at some point, if you're, and I don't know if, because I'm not a legal expert, or I haven't done research in this area. So when you have a prosecution in which you bring so many sort of liars as your witnesses, at what time do they lose their legitimacy as a witness? I don't know. That would be an interesting research question. For real.
So going back, what do you think of the prosecutor, and what was going through your head for the many days that the prosecution was running? Yeah.
It's like, this is so boring. Oh no, I mean, it was just like, it would just amaze you that they had so many informers,
Like you said that it felt like there was a lot of people in the VVAW that were informers. Like, obviously you guys...
Oh, VVAW. Well, I was making a more general statement about protest, and it seemed like if you look around, there were a lot of guys were just there for the chicks, as I said.
Yeah.
Free women, or they were there as informers. And it seemed like, probably half the people out there, once you started hearing them bringing all these witnesses forward, like, which person did I sit next to yesterday that was an informer, rather than a legitimate person with these values in which they were trying to express.
Since then, how is just your view of the federal government and the Department of Justice and the FBI been changed? Do you feel like you can ever really trust the government since?
With a grain of salt.
With a grain of salt.
Because, and I was having this conversation with somebody last night, and I'm like, here's my dilemma. So, I don't like guns. There are too many guns in this world. Another shooting in Boston last night. All these people have guns. Florida just passed the law. You can conceal carry. You don't even have to have a permit. It's messed up. I won't use the stronger language. It's horrible. And every time somebody tries to do something to either limit the guns or limit the kinds of guns that can be used, it gets struck down by Republicans and by, of course, the NRA. Now, did I grow up in a hunting family? Absolutely. The problem is, and they'll say, well, if nobody has guns, then only the government has guns. So I can see from this experience why it's important for people to have exercise their right to own a gun, but hell, everybody doesn't need a gun. I mean, and that's the solution people see. Well, what we need is good people with guns. Well, that's not the solution. We need to get to the root of the problems.
Do you feel like just if only there was like good people in government, if only the government was being fair, that would be, I don't want to put words into your mouth, but that's what I feel when I think about it. That's
I think, so say that again.
If only you need good people in government to make sure that people with gun, like if there's someone with a gun out there, to make sure who wants to hurt people, that they can stop them before they do that.
Right.
But you need people with guns in case the corrupt government then
right, and that's the dilemma.
Yeah,
that's it.
Yeah.
So part of the issue is, okay, why can't we have background checks for every gun purchase? Why do we have to have AR-47s out there, AK-47s? Why do we have to have? Why can't we have red flag laws?
Yeah.
Okay, so again, the gun thing is just an example of the dilemma. So you wanted to know, has my thoughts about the government or my relationship with the government changed, or is it positive, is it negative, is it mixed? And it's mixed because of these kinds of issues that we fail to solve.
Yeah.
And so the gun issue, failure to solve that is problematic to me because I see both sides of the story. Other issues are so as a professor and a vice president, AVP for research, I've brought in millions of dollars of funding from the federal government. And it's supported my research on improving outcomes for students with disabilities. Nobody's going to fund that. I got that from the U.S. Department of Education, or money from states to do research in their particular state that flowed from the feds. So that's a very, very important role that the federal government have, and I support it. And the people that I worked with in U.S. Department of Ed, in NSF, in NIH, Department of Energy, they were fabulous people. They were very good stewards of our federal dollars. But then I have to hear all this crap about the bureaucrats. And I didn't see them as bureaucrats. I saw them as colleagues. So that's another place where you can say, okay, well, I'm sure there's a lot of crap that goes on. And could we elect better folks? Absolutely. But at the same time, I've also seen a lot of good come out of that. So it's not a yes or no answer. It's a complicated answer.
Yeah.
And when you see, somebody like Trump go in and do things that change the environmental policy, change the voting rights, or the Supreme Court appointments, I totally disagree with those type of appointments because they've taken rights away from people. So do we have to be vigilant on our government? Absolutely. And if somebody had been vigilant back when Richard Nixon was president, maybe these 8 defendants and their supporters wouldn't have lived a year in hell and paid for it afterwards. There wasn't, what's the notoriety of being in the Gainesville Eight? You have to get on with your life and you have to figure out where do you go from here. So I've been held up a whole year plus of my life, at more than a year. And, who's paying me for that? No one. So it affects everybody's life. Now, what's awesome is that a number of the defendants and supporters like me, you went on to take the things that you learned from this or from your experience in this, and you use that to build your life with. So as my whole life has been focused on disability, access to transportation, things like that. So that's a good thing that came out of it. But there's a huge cost to people because of this. So, again, it's a mixed answer story regarding your relationship with your government, I guess I should say. Do I always vote? Absolutely.
Go register to vote.
Do I defend certain policies of the federal government? Absolutely. Do I bitch and protest about others? Absolutely.
Going forward, do you see any parallels between the events of the Gainesville Eight and current events?
Events of the Gainesville Eight and current events. Oh gosh. Well, this too is interesting. I won't say I would say there have been these other things that have seemed related to things. So you had the Pentagon Papers. That was a good thing because so much lying was going on while people were dying in Vietnam about everything that was going on over there and expectations to win the war and that kind of thing. So then we have this fella that's still in jail who released all these emails or what he did, and then the young guy that's in jail now, the cyber security guy.
Edward Snowden?
Yeah, well, Snowden won, and then the second guy is this young guy from the Army, and he worked in the electronic surveillance.
Oh, Chelsea Manning?
No, was it Chelsea Manning? No, that's not the latest guy, is it?
There's been a lot. Let's
right.
see.
So you look at what some of them have done, and you see impacts that it makes with our allies around the world, and so you go, man, it's too bad that stuff got out. But on the other hand, they're doing the same thing that that came up with the Pentagon Papers. So. Then you go, how do I resolve this? Is it okay sometimes and not okay others? Is it dependent on, I would love to have your history class, discuss, or political science classes, discuss these kind of questions, because when is this right? When is it not right? Does it depend on the content? Does it depend on the context? Does it, so I don't know. In some cases I go, oh, geez, we're in trouble now because of some of the stuff that's come out with Snowden or somebody else. And then you go, oh, but I'm so thankful the Pentagon Papers came out.
Well, that's actually my next question I was going to ask you is, what do you think of Chelsea Manning and Edward Snowden?
Right.
But do you have any particular thoughts about their cases?
Well, this stuff about Snowden raping somebody or whatever, and or sexually assaulting someone. As soon as I hear that stuff, I'm totally against the person. Sorry. I don't know if that's just something drummed up to keep them in jail or what. I don't know. But yeah, again, I have mixed feelings about it.
Well, focusing back on Vietnam, how do you remember the end of the U.S. role in Vietnam?
Oh, I remember the helicopters and people abandoning, flying out of Saigon, and the images of that, being thank God it's over, finally, but at the same time, they were very sad images. The other thing that's kind of, this is weird, but the other thing that's strange that came out of here, and I cannot remember her name, but one of a famous woman in the country is the one who saw and I don't remember what her name is, unfortunately, is the one who saw the need to help these Vietnamese women that came over here, that got out or eventually came over here to earn a living. And she's the one that sort of instigated the whole nail salon thing. Mm-hmm. So gave all these women jobs, they own their own businesses, et cetera, et cetera. And so that's like an inspiring thing that someone did. And since I go get my nails done, and very often in a salon in which Vietnamese women work, it's you don't ever forget that connection.
Yeah.
But I wish I got to remember her name. But it was either a movie star or it was somebody that was more like a movie star or somebody like that. Yeah, that made this investment in this. That's pretty amazing.
Do you remember what kind of political activism were you in after the war ended? What kind of political activism were you in when the war ended?
Oh gosh, okay, I belong to NOW. We support NOW, we support candidates. I've been very active in terms of disability rights and policies, so I've worked real closely with OSEP, Office of Special Education Programs, and so I've served on panels for them to look at the research. They actually took our research and they made it fundamental part of teacher preparation requirements. So seeing those kinds of things. I've had a national center funded by the U.S. Department of Ed I was involved from 90 to 2000 at the University of Illinois. We had the National Center focused on transition from school to work or school to life. We work with all the states and territories in the country and to improve outcomes for students with disabilities. So there were many times when they tell our center, and then I didn't have it from 1990 or 92 to 96, had it up until 92, didn't have it 92 to 96, won it back in 96 and had it until I retired in 2000. So so they would say, okay, you are in charge of this portion of IDEA, Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. So they would want our expert opinion on, okay, well, we've got suggestions from the states that we need to take out this part of their accountability requirements. And we're like, absolutely do not do that. The minute you do that, you're going to see that students' IEPs have no relevance to what their post-school goals are. It stays in. So hand-to-hand, person-to-person involvement in those kind of federal policies. But also because we worked with all the states, then we also were I've done policy analyses for probably at least 6 states in doing detailed look at their policies regarding career and tech ed, special ed, general ed, teacher prep, school to work, and whether or not their policies within their state support implementation of the research. So that's the idea. I did one for Michigan. In Michigan, their pupil accounting policies, which tell the teachers in schools what they can use state funding for, defined work-based education differently for kids with disabilities and kids without disabilities. Okay, why is that?
Yeah.
It can only be this for students with disabilities. It can be all of these things for students without disabilities. So I have to go to the mat with them about this policy. This policy is irrational, and it doesn't support the research. So a big focus of ours was doing the research and then research to practice. So I won actually an award from the American Education Research Association on our research to practice policies, or our model actually. And we've implemented it in all the states. The states are still using a strategic planning system that we started. So this is, again, this all came out of my work from those early days in looking at how do you make good? How do you change the world in some way, and how your work does that. So we developed a strategic planning system. Almost all the states use it. Thousands of local districts use it, and it's all focused on here's the research. Here are 4 areas of focus for you to use, and it has to do with their policies, their professional development, their technical assistance, and their policy analysis, professional development, and it's all based on their data. So how do you use your data to look at how well you're implementing the research and what your outcomes are? So that's
excellent.
That's what we do.
Yeah. That's all the questions I have for you today, but thank you so much for talking with us. I feel like we got so much insight on what it's like to have been there at the time. That's exactly what we want.
Okay, good. So what you're doing now, you just remember when you're 73 years old, you're going to be using this. Okay? Can you envision that?
I can. I'm gonna, I'll, what is it called? What is the word? I can't think of it. Anyway, thank you.
You're welcome.